Hey, I'm glad you found my quick video series on our IVF process. I hope that some of it might be helpful for you in your journey. I'm Katie Caraway, and my YouTube channel is all about finding balance and cultivating purpose in life, and IVF and my fertility journey is just one of the areas that has really been true. So this is a summary, a timeline of what my husband and I tried before we ended up trying IVF. Maybe you'll find some inspiration or hear something similar along the way, or maybe hearing my story will help you see some differences in your story or help you find your next step. So here we go. My husband and I got married in 2015. We pretty much immediately wanted to have kids. That whole first year, I think we went to 1 or 2 doctor's appointments, but they always just tell you it's normal for things to not happen in the first year. So it's not considered infertility until that period is up. Looking back, I would definitely say I've read a lot about this. I think it would be fine to push a little bit on that if you're in your 20s and something hasn't happened within the first 6 months, I would probably go ahead and get a little bit more proactive, but I didn't necessarily know that at the time. So we coasted through that first year and rode all the ups and downs that every cycle brought of disappointment of not conceiving. But then our next couple of years, which I've summarized in more depth in another video, we were living in Russia. And so during that time, we continued to follow up with doctor's appointments. And I had a hysterosalpingogram, which is an X-ray test where they're able to take a picture of your fallopian tubes and try to make sure there's no blockage. Because the way that the uterus is situated, the eggs are released from the ovaries and then they need to travel through the fallopian tubes in order to make it to your uterus. They'll ideally meet the sperm along the way and fertilize the egg, and then the egg can implant in the uterine lining. So my first hysterosalpingogram showed that I had a potential blockage on one of my fallopian tubes, but I read up and talked with my sister-in-law, who's a PA, and I just got good advice that just one of those tests isn't necessarily like 100%. Your uterus could like spasm during the test, or something else could cause it to appear blocked. So I was glad that I did a second HSG, and that one showed that both my fallopian tubes were open. So we used our time in Russia to also pursue just like diet and lifestyle health. I decided to cut sugar and dairy from my diet for a month just to see if it affected like the level of cramps that I was experiencing, and it really did cause a dramatic drop. So that's a good note to self, that if you could drop something, some of the inflammatory foods that we often eat like gluten, sugar, and dairy, that you could end up seeing just a shift in your fertility even from that. You never know if that shift is going to be enough to kind of push you over to the edge into that green zone of beautiful fertility, but it might be worth a try. We made some of those changes during our 3 years living in Russia. And then when we came back to the States, we decided to go ahead and make the investment of doing some fertility treatments, and we went with intrauterine inseminations. Those are IUIs. It's honestly, like, having gone through multiple of them, I would say it's a really like simple fertility treatment. You'll probably have 4 or 5 doctor's visits during the process, just getting to know your fertility clinic and getting your meds and stuff, but it's really low key, especially compared to IVF. So I'm thankful for that, and I'm thankful that the cost is pretty good too. Our first clinic, it was about $1,200 for an IUI. Sometimes once you're already established in their care, it's even less than that because you don't have to do initial blood work and stuff. So that can feel pretty affordable, especially when you compare it to IVF, which quickly gets into like 15 or 18 or 20,000, like really quickly gets up to that point. So IUIs, that's what we tried in 2020. And we tried 4 IUIs, which statistically, like, since nothing, quote unquote, nothing was wrong with our fertility from all of the tests that we'd had, we should have gotten pregnant. So it was kind of a clue when we didn't that something else was probably going on. So my fertility clinic said you should look into endometriosis, which I pretty much already knew I probably had. There's 5 major symptoms of endometriosis that include things like really heavy cramps, and your cycle health isn't ideal. You might have pain during intercourse, or there's a couple others, like you can literally Google it on like Mayo Clinic and stuff. It's really clear. Oh, infertility is one of them. And so I started reading up more on that. And my best resource that I did encounter from a friend is The Doctor Will See You Now. And it's just a book that details, it's by a endometrius surgeon specialist who works in New York. So that's all he does is surgeries for ladies for endometriosis. And he does a really good job of outlining what you want to know before you go into that surgery, because a lot of women get it done by their OB-GYN and don't have a great result from it and require multiple surgeries. And that's who he ends up seeing, is all of these ladies who have gone through multiple surgeries without having a lot of relief. So we forked out some extra cash and traveled all the way to Atlanta in order to see a specialist for that. And that was a wonderful decision, a wonderful investment that we made in 2021. I didn't know how abnormally painful my cycles had been until I got to experience the other side of that. And so that was shocking, but really good. So we were hopeful after that we might conceive naturally. We didn't in that upcoming year. And so at about the 8 or 9 month point, I wanted to go ahead and do a deep dive with a nutritionist and a functional practitioner. So I found an IFMCP, which is an Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. It's like the highest degree of certification that holistic practitioners can get. And that was a really good investment. I've worked with other holistic practitioners, and the quality of service and care and attention to detail that I got from this practitioner was really wonderful. I mean, you pay for it. I think my appointments were about $150 for each consult, and insurance usually doesn't cover it, but it was very much worth it. So the most valuable thing that I learned from my time with her was how to do an overhaul on my diet. And I used autoimmune paleo diet for 6 months as an elimination diet to try to find if there were any food allergies that I have. Thankfully, we know from testing that I don't actually have any severe food allergies, but we did discover that I have environmental allergies to dust mites, and that's actually still unresolved. That's something that I hope I'll get figured out in the future. I'm seeing an allergist for it, and I can apparently get allergy shots, but it's something that you have to do for like a year before you really see results. And we wanted to go ahead and make our investment with IVF first. So I've got that on hold, but I'll come back to it, especially if our IVF transfers don't work out. So after that, we tried another IUI because we thought, well, we got rid of endometriosis, maybe we'll see better results, and unfortunately we didn't. That IUI was also really expensive. I think it was kind of the more standard rate that you would have at a lot of fertility clinics, and it was about $2,500 that first time, because you have to do all the incoming patient blood work to get yourself established. And then from there, I don't remember what else. I think if I went and did another IUI there, it would probably be like $1,800 or something, but it just felt really expensive, especially compared to what we had paid at our previous clinic. So it's definitely worth price shopping around a little bit, and you'll get to know kind of the amount of financial transparency that a clinic is willing to have or not as you do that process. So that can be good. I think especially since our IUI was that expensive, when we heard what IVF costs, like especially at an international location in Panama, or later we found out if you travel to this network of clinics that's in New York, Atlanta, and Colorado, then we just realized we didn't want to pay for another IUI. We wanted to go ahead and make the investment in IVF. And that's always going to be a huge decision to make, but we did eventually end up there, partly because we had dear friends who conceived through that process, and multiple ones, and it was really eye-opening to hold their children and to see that this really works for some people. Yeah, it just felt hopeful, and it felt like it was time. I was 32, and we'd been working on our fertility stuff for 5 or 6 years, and so we were ready to make a bigger investment. We didn't start with looking at creating our own embryos. We started by looking at embryo adoption, which is this beautiful process where families can adopt the unused embryos of other families. I'll make a video about that, but I definitely want to put that plug in there for that, because it's something that I think is just so neat and a really redemptive way to consider adoption, even if you're really trying to aim for pregnancy as well. Since we knew about the clinic in Panama that offered an IVF package for $5,000 plus meds, it's $8,000, so that's just good to know. And embryo adoption, the only stuff that I knew about it said that it was $12,000 for the process plus $5,000 to $10,000 for legal fees. Felt like with embryo adoption we were looking at like a $20,000 investment, whereas we had this clinic in Panama that we were willing to travel internationally to go to, where we could do IVF for $8,000. So especially since we were fundraising and didn't have insurance coverage for our fertility stuff, then we felt like we wanted to go forward with that. So that's why we chose to create our own embryos, even though we originally opened the door to the IVF journey looking at embryo adoption. I've since found some encouraging information about embryo adoption on the CNY website, and I think there might be some more cost-effective ways to do that. So that's something that I'm interested in researching more on and that I hope you'll have the opportunity to look into if you want to, but I'll definitely include some of that in the links below. So in February of 2023, we traveled to Panama and did IVF there, and it didn't go very successfully because I had an ovarian cyst that we didn't know about. It had developed over the last 6 to 8 months, and it's probably related to endometriosis. And so that was very frustrating because we made the investment for the IVF process in Panama, and we thought that that would be our first trip and we would have multiple trips back. We thought it would be a multi-year process where it took years to give all of our embryos a chance at life in the womb. But instead, when we came back from Panama and 2 weeks later found out that we weren't pregnant, it was like we were back at square zero. We had no embryos and nothing to show from IVF. And yeah, so that was very disappointing in February of 2023. But over the next 6 months, we researched where we might want to go, and we ended up going to Colorado to do a second round of IVF. And we're just recently returned from that, and it went far better, which I think can happen pretty frequently for people who do IVF, that you learn a lot from the first visit and from the way your body responds to meds, and then the doctors can make adjustments and any necessary changes. I mean, I think the majority of women have enough eggs from their first go at IVF, but for those of us for whom it takes 2 times, I think that second time there's just a lot of valuable information that you have from the first one. So I still had the cyst during our Colorado IVF, but since the meds were adjusted, my body just responded better and it worked out better. So it will take us multiple visits and multiple years to give all of our eggs, our embryos, a chance at life in the womb. So that is my rapid fire summary of our 8-year journey. There's obviously a lot of ups and downs in that. I think in addition to being like obviously a very physical journey and one that affects your marriage, it is an emotional journey. And I think if you have eyes to see it, it's overlapping a lot with spiritual questions and frustrations about why things don't work out in the world. So I've talked about that in one of my videos on emotional health during IVF. And yeah, this was kind of more the fact by fact timeline, and I hope it helps and encourages you as you maybe try to figure out some of these same things. So I hope you'll stick around for some of my other videos. In this playlist, I'll chat about our experience with IVF in Panama. I'll chat about our experience with IVF in Colorado. I've got a video that's going to list out the resources, some of the books that I have found really helpful in this process. And yeah, just trying to share what I've experienced. See you next time.